Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you with another review. Today I'm reviewing a film from the early 70s, 1972 to be precise. It is directed by Freddie Francis. It is Tales from the Crypt. It has a 7.0 on IMDb, a 70% with the audience on Rotten Tomatoes, and 88% with the critics. I more or less agree with that because it is a good film. It's well shot, the acting fits the tone of each segment. But I have to say, it does pale in comparison to the later TV show. Now, if you haven't watched the film, it's kind of hard to explain exactly what makes this film good, as a whole. But this one review did kind of sum it up perfectly. There's something about Crypt that makes even jaded viewers feel like they're kids sitting in their rooms late at night with the lights out, telling eerie tales with the aid of a flashlight. And that is a perfect summation of this film. Like I said, its legacy pales in comparison to its sibling, but it still is pretty good on its own. The plot of the film is that we see five strangers who are with a tourist group going through these old catacombs. They get separated from the main group and they find themselves in a room with a mysterious stranger played by Ralph Richardson, who is the Crypt Keeper, which, if you're expecting something very grotesque like in the more recent show, you're going to be disappointed. But for this Crypt Keeper, he has more kind of a mysterious old man magician type vibe, even though he is kind of basic in his design. But that's just what it kind of comes off as. And he also has a little bit of omnipotence around him, mostly with how he talks to all the characters and reveals stuff to them, which is how the stories are told, which I feel is an interesting wraparound story, especially with the climax at the end. I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't watched it yet, but it is fitting for this direction. The five segments are And All Through the House, Reflection of Death, Poetic Justice, Wish You Were Here, and Blind Alleys. All Through the House involves a woman killing her husband on Christmas Eve, and as she's trying to get rid of the body, she hears a radio announcement stating that a homicidal maniac is on the loose and he's dressed as Santa Claus. And of course, she sees the killer, but because she's disposing of the body, she can't really call the cops without, alerting, alerting him to the fact she's murdered her husband. And that's where the tension in this segment comes from. It's a very slow building one, which makes it a good segment, and is a good for an opener. It's probably my second favorite out of all the segments. Then we get Reflections of Death, where we're introduced to a man who is abandoning his family to go with another woman, and they drive off together, and they're involved in a car accident. He wakes up, and as you can tell at first, something's wrong because everyone's like freaking out, and even his wife freaks out when he goes and sees her. And of course, we find out something about him. I think the title kind of gives it away. It's a nice little segment, nice little bridge between the opener and my favorite segment, Poetic Justice, which this one is about a man and his son. The son, they're both snobbish, but the son even more so. He resents their neighbor who is across the way, Arthur Grimsdyke, who is played in this segment beautifully by Peter Cushing. He owns a number of animals and entertains children at his house, and you can tell he's eccentric. The son wants to get rid of him, so first they frame his dogs and they get taken away. Then, they talk with some of the local parents and give little hints that not all is right with Grimsdyke and that he might be a child molester, or that's his eventual goal. So the children are forbidden to go see him. And then on Valentine's Day, they send a lot of vicious, mean letters to him, disguised as Valentine's, which you can tell really hurt him. And to add to this, Grimsdyke is, still going through the stages of grief over the death of his wife, and he's even trying to contact her with a Ouija board. And of course, something sad happens to him, but at the end, the son gets what's coming to him, which I really wonder why the dad even goes along with this or lets his son get away with this, because there's a couple of moments where you can see the dad is thinking, like, you're going a little too far, son, so you'd think he would walk over and smack him, but I guess he's a little snobbish. He's just not as snobbish as his son, but I guess he just figures, yeah, we'll get Grimsdyke out of here, but he's going a little too far, especially with what happens to Grimsdyke. But the title says enough about the ending for those. I don't want to spoil it all, but for those of you who are interested, the title does kind of give away what the ending is going to be as the segment goes along, but in a good way. And I haven't seen everything that Cushing has been in, but compared to what I've seen of him, the little snippets from his Frankenstein films and his Dracula films, and of course as Moff Tarkin in Star Wars, this is a different performance, but in a good way. And apparently, Peter Cushing was originally offered the role in the in the in the next segment, played by Richard Green, but he decided. Originally, Cushing was offered the role played by Richard Green in the next segment, but he thought that the role in this segment was a lot better. And he was told to act as himself in this movie because his wife had died recently and he was very depressed. So I guess that also adds to how convincing he is in the role, because he's really using a lot of that grief and channeling it into his characterization. And it really does work. Wish You Were Here. It's about an ineffective businessman who is close to financial ruin. As they're going through items him and his wife have collected over the years, his wife discovers a Chinese figurine that says it will grant 3 wishes to whoever possesses it. So from that you could tell it's a variation on the monkey's paw tale, which they do mention a couple times throughout the story. I guess that works, and it does, especially in the context it's used. Now, of course, she wishes for lots of money, and of course, this ends up with him dying. And if you know anything about the monkey's paw story, you can kind of tell where this is going to go. And their little twist on it, I really do like. I'm not going to spoil it. It has kind of a downer at the end, but it works. Then Blind Alleys, which this is probably my third favorite of the stories. More so because of the justice in the end. In it, we get a major character named Major Roberts, who is a new director at a home for the blind, which is mostly made up of elderly and middle-aged men. And he decides to make cuts, which includes reducing heating and rationing of food, which at the beginning you could tell that this guy really is cheap and this is not going to end well, because it's going to affect the people who live there in a negative fashion, and it also is going to eventually make them want to get even with him, which is what happens in the end, them getting even with him. I'm not going to spoil the manner in which the residents do get even, but it is a good one, and it makes for a good ending for this segment. And to steal the title from an earlier one, it is poetic. So it is poetic justice for this guy, especially with how much of an a-hole he comes off as when he's talking with the lead blind man, who in the face he doesn't look 100%, but he kind of reminds me of Tom Noonan a little bit in the face. The special effects for the most part are simple. Like during one accident scene, it's mainly just a bunch of cuts to different parts of it. Low budget but effective. I mean, the budget for this film was only £170,000, which I don't know what that would translate to in American currency of the time, but low budget. It's effective for it. For the death scenes, they're very simple. Like for in Poetic Justice, you never actually see what happens. We just see the beginning, and then we see the aftermath when it's discovered. It's just some makeup on the side, and then the actual end effect, very effective. Nothing really elaborate. The most elaborate effect is probably at the end of the film when the plot is revealed, and honestly, that effect didn't really age well. Probably didn't even look too good back in the early 70s, but it does betray the low budget nature of the film. As I said earlier, the film, while good, does pale in comparison to its sibling show, which I have not really watched a lot of Tales from the Crypt. I know most of it from just seeing random segments with the Crypt Keeper, and then of course watching the Demon Knight movie, and then parts of the second movie. But for what it is good. Like, the actors all do a good job for what they have to do. If there's any performances that stand out, it's probably Ralph Richardson as the Crypt Keeper, different than the Crypt Keeper from the show, but works. Like I said, he is very omnipotent, which ties in with the plot twist at the end. Apparently, from what I've read, Stephen King and George A. Romero originally wanted to remake this film, and all those talks eventually led to Creepshow, which I'm guessing is why Creepshow has the EC comic tribute style to it, which works for it. Would have been interesting to see that done in a remake of this film, but we got that vibe more with the TV show anyway.